Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. Today, we're going to be talking more about the NJSLA-Adaptive in our webinar From Test Items to Teaching, Instructional Implications of the NJSLA-Adaptive. My name is Anne-Marie Lawrence, and I am the Director of Curriculum and Workshop Delivery here at Inspired Instruction. And we're really excited to have you with us this morning and hope to continue to shed some light for you around the new NJSLA-Adaptive. Before we begin, I just want to touch base about a few reminders. The first is that after the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email. And in that email, you will receive a resource document as well as a recording to the webinar. The resource document will share with you some of the resources that I'll be taking you through this morning, and then you'll be able to have those and use them as you wish to help support the work of preparing for NJSLA Adaptive. And finally, we do have a Q&A feature. My colleague, Dr. Jacqueline Sayano, is joining us this morning, and she'll be managing the Q&A. I do want to let you know that what we've included in our webinar this morning is everything that we know up to this point that has been released by the state. So if we do not address a question that you have today, it's likely because we don't have the answer, but please feel free to ask those questions and we will certainly respond to the ones that we can and follow up with you about anything that we cannot answer today. So let's go ahead and get started. So to frame our session this morning, these are our key topics. First, we'll take a look at the NJSLA Adaptive in action. We'll look a little bit closer at the testing schedule, the blueprints, and the item design. We'll move into the instructional impact of NJSLA Adaptive by taking a look at some sample items and talking around student experience. And we'll finish up this morning with some classroom-ready strategies. So let's go ahead and jump right into the NJSLA in action. First, let's take a look at scheduling. So NJGPA Adaptive is scheduled for March 16th through March 20th, with makeups March 23rd to March 27th. And the NJSLA Adaptive for ELA Math and Science are scheduled for April 27th through May 22nd, with makeups May 26th through May 29th. In terms of scheduling your testing units, for ELA and Math, each of these units will have 2 sessions. ELA reading unit is 2 sessions, each session 75 minutes, and mathematics mirrors that with 2 sessions, each session lasting 75 minutes. What's new and different this year is that ELA writing will be assessed separately in its own unit, and this unit will last for 90 minutes, where students will respond to a single prompt. These testing times do not account for the recommended additional time that you may want to add. About 25 to 30 minutes is recommended for student login, reading of directions from the administrator's script, and then also logging students off after testing. You may be wondering about pairing unit sessions. So for both the NJSLA and NJGPA Adaptive, a maximum of 1 unit of testing can be administered in a single day. And in this case, unit refers to the content area. So the unit would be math or ELA or science. The writing ELA should be administered in a single day. That is one 90-minute session. For reading and math units, you can pair those testing sessions within a single day. And there are a few ways that you can pair these sessions. Both sessions of ELA reading or both sessions of math can be administered back to back with a supervised about 10-minute break in between. Another option that you have here is that you can administer both of those sessions on the same day with an extended break, for example, a lunch break in between, or you can break up those 2 sessions and administer them over 2 days. For the testing blueprints, you may already have access to these documents. If not, we are going to share them in the resource document you'll receive as a follow-up to the webinar. So we'll take a quick look at the blueprints as overall, and then we'll take a little bit of a closer look at each of them as we talk specifically about the different content areas. So the NJSLA Adaptive and NJGPA Adaptive blueprints all live in the same document, and they contain the test areas and provide more detail on structure and the content around the domains. So as you can see just from this NJGPA blueprint that you'll find the item breakdown for reading, as well as a more specific breakdown into literary texts and informational texts. It will break down test items for writing. It also addresses a little bit about language, the language domain, which we'll address later in our time this morning, as well as the mathematics blueprint. And again, the GPA and NJSLA, those test blueprints can be found in the same document. In terms of item design, you might be wondering how the test items on the NJSLA-Adaptive compare to the previous versions of the test items on our past assessments that we were looking at. So just to reiterate what adaptive testing is a type of assessment that adjusts the difficulty of questions based on a student's responses, and it provides a more accurate measure of what they know and can do. In terms of the NJSLA Adaptive testing that we'll be seeing in the spring, the ELA reading and the math units are the units that are truly adaptive. Writing is not an adaptive testing unit. Science is also not an adaptive testing unit, as there have been no changes made to the spring administration of the science assessment. So ELA reading and math are the truly adaptive units. So what does this mean for test item design? So we'll start with math. When we look at the math items, no longer will items be classified as type 1, type 2, or type 3 test items due to the adaptive nature of the test. As you recall, in past administrations of the NJSLA, type 2 and 3 items were hand scored. All test items are going to be conceptual and procedural test items that will be computer scored. We do not yet have clarity around the structure of scoring or point values, but as soon as that information becomes available, we'll be sure to update. What we have found with the math test item design in particular is that students are going to be required to manipulate technology in some more complex ways, and we'll take a closer look at some of those as we move into our specific content areas. And here you can just see a quick example of a test item from math. In terms of the ELA reading and how test items are designed, the reading unit will still engage students in the evidence-based selected response items, as well as the technology-enhanced constructed items. So some ways that students might interact with technology is there may be single select items, there may be multi-select items. Students will be required to drag and drop. As I mentioned, they will still engage with the EBSR items, those Part A and Part B response questions. And there's also a highlight feature that students may engage in as part of their responding. Previously, the bulk of the test items were the Part A and Part B technology enhanced constructed response items, and released items do present to be more of a variety. We know that ELA writing will be tested as its own unit, so students will no longer respond to a literary analysis task, research simulation task, or narrative writing task as part of the ELA reading unit. Students will now have one writing unit prompt, and it will be a narrative, an argumentative, or an informative explanatory prompt. It is not clear at this time how it will be determined which type of writing tasks students will get. It is unknown whether all students in a single testing group or grade level will get the same task, or whether tasks will vary across the group, as we know that different variations of tests have varied across testing groups in the past. Let's take a look at the instructional impact of NJSLA-Adaptive. We'll take a closer look at sample items and talk through how this relates to student experience. So first of all, where can you find sample items? You may or may not already be familiar with the Cambium platform that has been released through the DOE website. On this website, you can find access to practice tests and sample items. There are practice tests and sample items for both the NJSLA-Adaptive and the NJGPA-Adaptive. On the sample items, the testing platform does not work in an adaptive manner, but you still can engage with the type of content and the type of technology that students will encounter on these assessments in the spring. When you arrive at this website, you'll want to first navigate to the Students and Families Assessment page from the DOE website. When you select the options for the practice tests that you see on your screen, it will take you to a page where you can select online practice tests or paper-based practice tests. When you select the online practice tests, you will then receive an option to encounter the New Jersey practice test items or the option for experiencing sample items. We will talk about the differences between these two options. When you go into the NJ practice test option, which is this green bar that you see on the screen, this option has sample tests broken down by specific grade level. And these are a great option for engaging with the content that will be assessed since they are presented specifically by grade level. What's different about the experienced sample items, if you haven't taken a look at the two in a comparative way yet, the experienced sample items are grouped by grade band. You've got a 3 to 5 grade band, a 6 to 8 grade band, and then you have a high school grade band. What we have found is the experienced sample items, those practice items contain a greater variety of item types. So here students will be experiencing more of the technology practice that they may encounter on the testing platform. So again, just to reiterate that the practice test items are great for content as they are unique to grade level. And the experienced sample items are great for engaging and practicing with that technology and for students to maneuver through the platform. We'll take some time now to talk specifically through each content area, and we'll begin with mathematics. These are some examples of the blueprints for mathematics. And in the blueprints document that you may already have seen, but that we will be sharing through our resource document at the end of our webinar, the blueprints for mathematics will lay out specifically for each grade level or course the item breakdown as they relate to domains and to standards. The math blueprints are unique by each grade level, so we won't take a close look at each grade level right now, but that will definitely be something that you'll want to do. Each blueprint is unique in grades 3 to 8. Each blueprint is unique for 3 high school courses. And then there's a unique blueprint for NJGPA Adaptive as well. When we look at some of the sample items here for mathematics, this particular item comes from the sample items in the grades 3 to 5 grade band. As I mentioned previously, we have found that with the test items, particularly in math, some of the technology manipulation is a little bit more complex than we have seen in previous years. If you take a look at this grade 3 to 5 example, for instance, students have several jobs here. They need to understand how to interpret the directions for the technology. They need to understand how to manipulate the technology. They need to understand and address the multi-step directions for solving the problem. as well as understanding the mathematics content behind the problem. In this particular example, students need to engage the tools at the top above the grid, starting with the Connect Line tool. Students then select points to click where they want to begin a line, and they click on a point where they want to end a line. They continue this process until they have built out the rectangle that they are being asked to create in this task. Students are also asked here to drag one of these numbers from this vertical number line into the box here to note their final response. So you can see that the technology is quite advanced here, and there is a lot that's happening for students cognitively with the content of the question, as well as manipulating the technology. Here is an example from the grade band 6 through 8. And again, students are required to manipulate multiple technology features, as well as understanding the directions and the content behind the question. We have one final example here from a high school item. And what's notable here is that the directions here do not clearly state specifically that students should click on numbers as their selection of a pair of vertical angles. So this is a clear example of the importance of spending time in the platform prior to testing. Even students with testing experience may face uncertainty with some of the item construction. Moving into NJSLA reading and the blueprints and sample items here. We'll start by taking a closer look at the blueprint for the ELA reading unit. So again, the reading unit will consist of two 75-minute sessions where students will read a passage or passages and respond to a series of those evidence-based selected response and technology-enhanced constructed response questions. One test session will focus on literary text, the other on informational. As you look at the blueprint, you'll be able to see more clearly the breakdown of the number of items in each of those domains, as well as the possibility for single passage sets versus multiple passage sets. When you get a close look at the ELA blueprints, you will see that grade 3 has a unique blueprint. Grades 4 and 5 share the item breakdown blueprint, as do grades 6 through 9 and the NJSLA-Adaptive. The blueprints break down the number of test items in not only a broad breakdown for reading, but additionally into specific breakdowns as they relate to literary and informational. I mentioned that it also denotes the expected range of single passage sets versus multiple passage sets. At this time, we do not know, it's not clear if the minimum and maximum number of questions is linked to rigor and will be determined by the adaptive nature of the test in response to student performance, or if all students are subject to receive the same number of questions. As we look at some sample items, each reading session will begin with a single or multiple passage set. And once again, the blueprints will help us to understand the number of test items as well as passage sets to be expected. Students then respond to a series of questions about the passage. This series of examples that we'll take a look at demonstrates, again, the variety of technology enhancements that students may be expected to engage with. In the particular examples that you see on the screen here, students are asked to drag and drop images. They're also asked to drag and drop sentences or phrases, as well as using a multiple select item. These examples show again a drag and drop, as well as a multi-select response item. It's important that our younger students, especially, and first-time test takers, understand the difference between multiple choice and multiple select. When we look at multiple select responses, students are expected to select more than one correct answer, which differs from multiple choice. These small nuances and potential misunderstandings of item design can impact student performance, and it can impact difficulty for the remainder of the test, as we know we're working with an adaptive nature of the test. Students will still encounter the two-part evidence-based constructed response items, where their answer to Part B directly supports their answer to Part A. We'll talk about NJSLA writing here, which, as we know, is the biggest shift in unit structure, as students now are assessed in writing as a separate unit in a 90-minute testing block. Starting with the blueprints. So all grade levels, grades 3 through NJGPA adaptive, have the same writing and language blueprint. Each student will respond to one writing prompt. Writing prompts are directly tied to the narrative, argumentative, and informative explanatory writing standards. Students will receive a 4 or 5 point rubric score, depending on their grade level. As from the blueprint, the writing domain student level subscore will include the written expression rubric score, as well as a just proficient mean rubric score for students who scored at the proficient level for the writing item. To the right, you can see the written expression point total breakdown. Grades 3 through 5 will work from a 4-point rubric. Grades 6 through 9, as well as NJGPA, will work from a 5-point rubric. So students receive their actual 4 or 5-point rubric score, and the score is interpreted in relation to the average score of students who just met proficiency. So this helps show whether a student is barely proficient, solidly proficient, or approaching advanced within the proficient band. So when we talk about a just proficient mean score, in other words, that means that the just proficient mean represents the average score of students who are right at the threshold of proficiency. So think of it as the maximum score needed to be truly considered proficient. It helps us understand where a student falls within the proficient range, whether they just met expectations or exceeded them. As we refer to the 4 and 5-point written expression rubrics that are mentioned in the blueprint, it is unclear at this time whether that written expression rubric is referenced in the blueprints is the same as the written expression portion from previous writing rubrics. This is a sample from the grade 3 to 5 sample item platform. For this explanatory writing prompt, students read 2 passages and they respond to the corresponding prompt. Something to note here, and something that is different from previous writing task structure, is the use of the phrase passage set. Previously, the language was typically both articles or both stories. In many cases, the prompt specifically listed out the specific passage titles. Here you can see the use of the phrase passage set. This phrase might be a little less clear to students, so it would be something you would want to target during instruction. This sample is an argumentative writing prompt sample, and this comes from grade 7. The prompt provides a grounding heading at the top of the passage set, which connects the two passages. That's what you see on the screen here. So the grounding heading, do video games have a major effect on players' physical health, grounds these two specific sources. The heading is then what is referred to in the prompt rather than the individual passage titles. It'll be important for students to make that connection, that grounding heading refers to the sources that are listed below. In this prompt, the passage set is referred to as sources. So this is another opportunity to introduce students to testing vocabulary that they're likely to encounter. This sample comes from grade 8, and it is a narrative sample from the practice test platform. In this item, students are provided a short grounding passage that connects to the prompt. Something notable here is that in some grade level examples, for example, the grade 3 sample for narrative, the prompt is based on a picture. So here in grade 8, there's a grounding passage that moves students into a narrative prompt. Let's take a look at the NJSLA-Adaptive language domain. The language domain is referred to in the testing blueprint underneath the writing domain. And all grade levels, 3 through NJ-GPA have the same blueprint for language as well, and students will encounter 4 to 6 vocabulary items. The language domain score will include the vocabulary items as well as the 4 or 5 point conventions rubric score. So while the language domain is not assessed as its own unit, it is assessed through the ELA units. So the language domain reporting category includes those 4 to 6 vocabulary items that are associated with the passage sets that students will engage with, as well as the conventions rubric score. Just as I mentioned previously with the written expression component of the rubric, it is unclear at this time whether the knowledge of conventions rubric that's referenced is the same as the knowledge of conventions portion of the previous writing rubric. These are a few sample language test items, and language items will assess both the literal and interpretative language standards. Let's get into some classroom-ready strategies. So the big question that we're all asking is, how can we plan instruction to support students? The NJDOE website does offer a variety of testing resources. So one strategy for teachers and administrators is to become familiar with the assessment platform and the resources. When you navigate to the NJDOE website, you will find online practice tests. You'll find sample items. It does provide answer keys. There are also paper-based practice tests. And all of these resources are available in all content areas, ELA, math, and science. Again, I recommend using the sample items for direct instruction of the platform tools, and use the online and paper-based practice tests to engage students with the test item design and content. Just to reiterate those differences, the sample items are grouped by grade band and demonstrate a greater variety of technology, whereas the online and paper-based practice tests are specific to a grade level and align with the content. Engaging students with technology will be really important. As I mentioned earlier, many of the sample items demonstrate an increased challenge in technology manipulation. When students are expected to understand the content, follow multi-step directions, and understand the technology, there's a greater cognitive load, and misconceptions about item construction can impact student performance. Direct instruction on technology using the sample items platform is highly recommended. Students should engage with the technology prior to engaging with the content. And once again, the online practice tests and paper and pencil-based practice tests are great for engaging with the content. Answer keys are also provided, and these are a great resource. We'll navigate there to take a look at those. As you scroll through, you'll find that you have your answer keys for your computer-based practice tests that align to what you can find on the practice platform. Another strategy is to ensure that you're aligning instruction to the NJSLS and to test item design. So we want to reframe our thinking. We don't want to consider that we're teaching to the test. So we want to think about aligning our instruction to teaching to the standards as well as the test item design. And when we understand the item types, we're teaching students how to think, analyze, write, and justify their ideas in rigorous ways. If we embed practices and rigor into daily instruction, students will achieve the standards, and that, of course, is our ultimate goal. The standards are designed with rigor, so when we stay close to the standards and ensure that daily instruction is standards aligned, students will be much more prepared for the rigor of the NJSLA-Adaptive. Utilizing current curriculum materials and preparing your own test items to engage students in technology is a great place to get started. These are some resources that you'll receive in your follow-up resource document that will help you to do this. Let's take a closer look at these. So we will provide you with these EBSR and TECR editable templates where teachers can create their own test items using your own curriculum materials and NJSLS. All of these templates are editable, so you can align them directly to your instruction, but it will give students a risk-free opportunity to work with the technology as well as their grade-appropriate content. An additional resource that we'll share with you is EBSR Part A. We have these sample question starters for the EBSR Part A sample questions. So students can engage in those Part A and Part B questions where we know that Part B responses need to directly align to and support their Part A responses. We have an additional resource of TECR question templates. It's just another option for you to use in order to help students engage in technology while you're also providing direct instruction of the content that is appropriate to your grade level. When you are creating your own content-aligned items, there are some things that you want to be sure to include. The first is distractors. Distractors are intentionally crafted, incorrect answer choices that reflect student misconceptions that are common or partial misunderstandings. So when creating your own test items, it is important that you include distractors and instruct students on how to recognize distractors. This is something that they will encounter on NJSLA-Adaptive. This has been part of the testing structure previously and will remain so. Additionally, you want to ensure that you are engaging students with NJSLA-Adaptive vocabulary. We took a look at a couple of quick examples earlier when we were discussing our reading items. We talked about the phrase passage sets being a new phrase that students may not be familiar with. We also talked about the word sources as it refers to the passages that students will need to reference in their writing as a word or phrase that may not be familiar to them. So engaging NJSLA adaptive vocabulary into daily instruction is really important. Using a word wall is a great way to do so. It's important that as you introduce vocabulary, that you are using that vocabulary and expecting students to use that vocabulary in daily instruction as well. You also want to include error analysis, in particular with your math items. In previous tests, students have had to analyze error, and that will continue to be part of the NJSLA-Adaptive. One of the resources that you will receive in your resource document is an error analysis example and a template. This is a great activity that students can engage in where they are sorting errors. They're looking at common misconceptions that students make and sorting those errors into this grade 7 example into properties and operations. This resource also provides a blank template so that you can design it in a way that aligns to your particular content. With the biggest structure change happening in writing this year, it's going to be really important that students build writing stamina and have a structured writing process. Previous prose constructed response items came at the end of the ELA test session, and that test session lasted a total of 75 minutes. With the new testing structure, students will now be expected to write in a full 90-minute session. Building writing stamina and becoming more comfortable with a structured writing process will serve students really well. This is a structured 6-step process that you can model and teach. And the more students engage with the process, the more likely they will be to utilize it during testing. It's recommended to start in small chunks of time with each of the 6 steps and then build upon them. Spend time practicing each step in isolation. That will build student confidence with each step so that you can move toward building through all 6 steps in response to a single prompt. To build stamina, also begin in small chunks and simulate the testing environment. Many students, especially our youngest test takers, are likely not used to sitting through a 90-minute work session. So just like the steps of the writing process, start in small chunks and build. Maybe you start by requiring students to sustain task effort for 15 minutes. Once students become comfortable with that length of stamina, you can add time and begin to build up to that eventual 90-minute block. Another item that we'll share with you in our resource document is this gathering evidence document. As we know with our writing, students do need to use evidence from the passage sets and sources that are provided to them within their writing prompt. This particular resource provides you with a blank template that students can use on their own, as well as a sample of what it might look like for students to utilize this during the writing process. If you embed gathering evidence as part of a structured writing process in your daily instruction, this will become second nature to students when they're facing their writing prompt on NJSLA-Adaptive. So what are your next steps? First and foremost, become familiar with the testing blueprints so that you know what to expect. Familiarize yourself with the platform, hone in on task item construction and vocabulary, model and implement these things in the classroom as part of your daily instruction. As a reminder, you will be emailed a helpful resource document over the next few days as a follow-up to this webinar, as well as a recorded version of the webinar. We have contact information at the bottom of this resource document. If you have any further questions or require any further support, please let us know. Inspired instruction can support in many ways. We have our on-site and virtual workshops. We can also support through in-person or virtual coaching and through PLCs. The workshop titles that you see listed here are part of our current NJSLA-Adaptive collection. The 6-step process for responding to the writing prompts will help to secure that writing process that was shared a few moments ago, helping students to work through math items and integrating into your daily instruction. I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you would like to have myself or one of my fellow team members discuss this further or discuss other ways that we can support you, you can reach us via email at info@inspiredinstruction.com or by phone with the phone number that you see on the screen. You can also go to our website to make a call request, and one of us will reach out to you. We're asking that you take a moment to complete our webinar survey. I have placed the link in the chat, and we really appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much for joining us. As we continue to learn more about NJSLA-Adaptive, we will be at the forefront of sharing that information with all of you. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful day.